He has been exploring ecological processes for a long time, and now he's even going to explore vertical farming and urban agriculture and how that can secure the future food production. Give a huge hand to Dickson Despommier.
So they say on Monty Python, now for something completely different. Well, maybe not. Maybe we can have a continuation of the themes that we just heard. So my background is in microbiology. I have a PhD in parasitism. So I studied parasites. That's what I used to do. And then there was a change that occurred in my life when the funding for my research didn't appear on my doorstep for the 8th time. I had 7 consecutive grants, and then the 8th grant didn't materialize, so I had to do something else. So I started to teach more. And I love teaching, as some of you may have gathered for the last 2 days of our associations. I like telling stories. And so I had a nice small class of 7 students, and in that classroom, this idea emerged. And that was in 1999. Before that, I'm sure people have thought about raising food in buildings. There's a lot of literature, early literature on the utopian societies. Buckminster Fuller, Frank Lloyd Wright, Walter Gropius. I can name a whole bunch of people that have written about this. John Todd in recent years, using plants as living machines to improve the environment, to rescue damaged environments from heavy metals and things of that sort. But no organization with regards to putting the actual plants that we eat on a daily basis inside of a skyscraper. Now, how ridiculous does that sound? And I'm sure it does sound ridiculous. It certainly sounded ridiculous to us. But that didn't stop us from exploring the possibilities. So the first year that the idea arose, it was just that. It happened on the last day of class. And so the term vertical farm didn't actually arise until the summer between that class and the next year's class. And so for the next 10 years, every one of those classes worked on this idea. And we began with the premise that this is crazy. This is absolute technological insanity to think about taking perfectly good technology of soil-based agriculture and moving it into a building. So now you have to find the sun somehow, take away the soil, so you have to find out how to feed the plants in a different way, and move it very close to where you live, mainly in the cities. So it didn't sound crazy after all. It sounded like, maybe some of this is already going on someplace. So we began to look around the world, and sure enough, we could find good examples of what you would call a high-tech greenhouse. So high-tech greenhouses existed for many years, and sort of paved the way for this idea, basically. Although they never actually took responsibility for the term vertical farm, because a greenhouse is a single-story building. So what I'm about to tell you is what happened after that idea arose. So everybody's fond of these sort of word puzzles. So if you throw the word urban and agriculture together, they don't seem to actually fit. But they do, because in the old days, that's exactly how agriculture started. It actually began in the center of cities, because cities arose around where agriculture was invented. So if you look back through the Middle East where wheat originated, or in China and Southeast Asia, or rice and barley and millet, you can find cities that arose around where the food supply was. And that's a natural association. Because now we can afford to feed more people, we can have civilization. And so 10,000 years ago, that was the advent of the first green revolution. And we've been living through that ever since. So today we find ourselves in a very interesting position where now all the farms are on the outside of the cities. The cities are now dependent upon them for their livelihood, so to speak. And so we now have an urban agricultural movement to move those farms back towards where the cities first had them. And here are some of the reasons. Food safety, big issues. Everybody's concerned about, should I really eat this? The answer is yes. What reason do you have for not eating it? And the answer is, well, maybe someone did an analysis on it and found something that would make you sick. Maybe a heavy metal, maybe some pesticide. Perhaps there's a noxious agent that's going to make you sick. Sustainability is another word. I know that everyone's sick and tired of hearing about that word. I guess it means something to different people. If you'd ask an astronomer what sustainability means, they'll give you the definition of the origins of the universe. And if you ask a politician what it means every 3.5 years. But for us, it means a reliable source of food that doesn't become unreliable. And the trouble with the outdoor world is that it is now becoming very unreliable. And of course, we want it to be environmentally friendly too. We want it to be local. We want to support local farming. We want the farmers of the world to feel wanted. That doesn't mean the big mechanized farms of, let's say, the industrial United States where wheat and corn is grown for industrial purposes. I'm talking about the little dirt farmer, let's say, in Jutland, that manufactures food that needs a market. And I've heard a lot about that over these last 2 days, so I've really come up to speed with regards to what's happening here. And so the local food movement in the United States is the same. There's no difference. Wherever I've gone to give these kinds of talks, I've found the same people at the meetings. They're all interested in a more reliable food source, a more robust food source, one that they can trust, one that they can support. And then you throw this on top of the outdoor farming situation, and you really got some problems. Climate change, for those that accept the data from the IPCC, has really rearranged the agricultural landscape over the last 50 years. And the acceleration of that change is what you're feeling now, but it began sometime before. Before we could perceive it, unless you were a Pinot Noir grape farmer. So Pinot Noir grapes are the canary in the cage for farming in general. It grows within a 2-degree latitude of each other. That's where the Pinot Noir grape does best. And if you ask a vintner where they get their Pinot Noir grapes from today, as opposed to 20 years ago, they'll all tell you that they're different, that everything is different now. In the northern hemisphere, that zone is moving north, and in the southern hemisphere, that's moving south. It's irrefutable evidence of climate change. Irrefutable evidence. And those are from farmers. That's not from some politician or from esoteric scientists doing number crunching in a little room all by themselves. This is reality. And the risk now in agriculture, at least outdoor agriculture, is very serious. So we are now experiencing many more crop failures per year. We're experiencing the lack of, or the abundance of water, which is the big driving force. Without water, there is no life, as you know. So here's a great example I can give you from California. In California, this is the breadbasket of America. And look what happened to it. Over 4 years, it's gone from no drought to extreme drought. It's a $70 billion industry. Half of that is dairy farming, by the way. So if the regular truck farming were to disappear, the dairy farmers would probably still be able to make a living. So we're talking about two different societies, basically, in California. But when you consider the amount of loss to the consumer, the price of food in the United States has been going up steadily since those droughts have hit. And so that's the consequence. The people that can afford those, like you and I, it hasn't made a difference in the way we eat. But the people living in the margins, those are the people that are affected most by all these changes. Besides, nobody wants to be a farmer anyway. It's too dangerous. It's very low pay for a lot of hard work. But if you ask a farmer why they farm, they say, because my father farmed. And you ask him, why is it? And you go right back to the origin of the farm on that particular place. They do it because they love it. They don't do it because they make a lot of money. In fact, farmers don't make a lot of money. The middlemen, maybe they make a lot of money. And maybe the retailers make money too, but the farmer themselves don't. So I think the cooperatives that you're setting up here could make a real difference in both the farmer's income and reliability for the food sources as well. And then, of course, there are too many failures. This just shows you the trend in my country, but I think it's true for a lot of others too. You start looking at farming in the 1930s, and these are how many people were employed, and all of a sudden you see down over here, this is how many are currently employed. But notice what's happened to the yields. So you're looking at mechanized farming. Massive farming on a massive basis. But by the way, this has ramifications for the environment too, the natural environment. The more you farm, the less nature there is. And so we'll come to that at the end of this as an unintended consequence of supply food. If you live in the Indian subcontinent, the problems are even more exacerbated by the fact that their whole farming industry is dependent upon the monsoons. And the monsoons are failing. By that I mean, you get too much too soon, and you get too little too late. So you get all this rain all at once, it washes all the soil away, prevents you from farming after it subsides, and what's left is not enough to last from the irrigation projects that they have, so the crops eventually fail at the end of the year due to drought. So that's their situation, and they're facing this not just in India, but also in Southeast Asia as well. And so those are literally billions of people affected by this change, and that's all climate change related. And then finally, this is my specialty, this is microbiology, this is you are what you eat. I'm not sure all of you know this or not. I know one person at lunch didn't, so I'll just share this with all of you. There are more cells on you and in you that are not you than are you. You knew this, right? Okay. So those are bacteria and viruses that you are a walking ecosystem, basically. Each one of us is a walking ecosystem. So microbes matter, and sometimes bad ones get into the way of things. And this shows you, just from our Centers for Disease Control and Prevention for the year 2012, all of these fancy named organisms are foodborne or waterborne, and they affect human health. And so this is a business, right? Am I not right? Is this a business? Yes. Okay. So I'm not a business person, but I can show you what the consequences of this are in economic terms. $15,534,847,106 were spent in 2012 taking care of those people that got sick from those diseases. That's a lot of money, even around. For Warren Buffett, that's a lot of money. So because farming is failing on a global scale, urbanization is increasing. This is particularly true in Asia and South Asia. So that's where a quarter of the world lives. You've got lots of people moving to the city, looking for jobs because they used to be farmers, but they aren't farmers anymore. So again, we come back to this word game. And if you look real hard, I'm sure you can find the word agriculture in that. Maybe you can, but if you can't, it's because it hasn't emerged yet into the word gamesmanship, okay? But urban agriculture is certainly a reality. And today, we have about half of the world living in cities, half living in the country. So 50-50, first time in the history of humankind. 7.2 billion people, evenly distributed between the countryside and the cities. That's interesting too. So, why not have urban agriculture? Why not? What's wrong with doing it? Some people would say, because it's not natural. It's not natural. You're doing it in buildings. You're using hydroponics. You're using artificial lights. It's not natural. How many people here think farming is natural? I don't. I can tell you when it started. Why Why can we tell when it started? Because it's new. It's something that we contrived in our little brains about 10,000 years ago. That's how new it is. Now we're a species for about 200,000 years. So for about 190,000 years, it didn't even occur to us to farm. We didn't have any need for farming. We were hunters, we were gatherers, we were having fun. Come on. We were traveling the world. We were seeing places. We were fighting with each other. We were being eaten by lions. We were having a lot of fun. So the moment that we got the idea to farm, we also got the idea to form cities. The same time. In fact, one caused the other to happen. And once you had cities, you could have culture. And when you have culture, you can have mathematics, music, languages, cuisines, the works, differences, fights, wars, you know, all those things. So urban agriculture has become a catchword for urbanism. Believe it or not. If you go around the world now, I've been doing that, so if I look tired, that's why. And you talk to people of all ages, and you're in the city to begin with, because you're invited to give a talk, let's say Bangalore, which is one of the places I've been to, or Chennai, or even to Bhutan. Some exotic places. Everybody wants their food close to where they live. Everybody. So here's how you can do it. Now, I'm going to tell you how to do it in one way, but there are plenty of other ways of doing it. So we started the idea about vertical farms. So that's, sure, if farming is a natural, then so is vertical farming. So it doesn't matter how you do it. It matters how you do it well. So if you do it poorly, outdoor farming is a hazard. You can contaminate your crops with things that you don't want to get into the food supply, but nonetheless they do, like heavy metals, or pesticides, or herbicides. And if you do that indoors, the same thing can happen, only it's got different sets of conditions. So you don't need herbicides indoors because you just lock the door and keep them out. And you don't need pesticides because you just lock the door and you keep them out. But you still need to feed the plants because everybody has to eat. I was curious yesterday when we were invited to eat some arthropods of various sorts, which I found lightly, I must say. What do they eat? They never did actually say that, did they? You know, you're going to grow up a whole bunch of insects and feed them to people. Well, the insects have to eat something too. And the pyramid of life is constructed in a very simple fashion. It's a pyramid, and here are the plants, and then here are the animals that eat the plants, and here are the animals that eat the animals that eat the plants. So this pyramid is indeed a whole bunch of plant life equals a set amount of animal life. So it's a 10% ratio. If it takes 1,000 pounds of alfalfa, you can only grow 100 pounds of cow. And that's true for the cow feeding people too. So those insects have to eat something. So I'm a little curious about the energetics of that. So vertical farming, let me just concentrate on that because my time is limited. And let me just say to you that if I were wearing a shirt with buttons, that at this moment they would be popping off my shirt with pride for my students who forced me to continue to explore this concept until I finally got it, maybe year 4 of this project in class. So I wrote a book called The Vertical Farm, of all things, an unusual title, but nonetheless, there it is. And the reason why I'm mentioning the book's title is because if you buy a used copy and it's really cheap, and you look in the back of the book, you can see the name of all 106 students that contributed to this project. Every single one of those students is mentioned, because without them, I wouldn't be here. So you're listening to them through me. So we now have what they call plant factories. I don't use that term. I hate the term, in fact. It's a Japanese term. Plant factory in Japan means something really good. For me, it means industrialization and control and Monsantoism and all that other stuff, which they don't mean it to me. But, you know, I live in the Western world, and that's what it means to me. So someone wrote a book recently from the Japanese perspective, and instead of using the word plant factory, they included the word vertical farming, so you know that they meant it to mean the same thing, which is encouraging. Here's one that they erected in Korea back in 2009, and I had the privilege of visiting it. It's only 3 stories tall, but right next to it, there's a building that exceeds the size of this building, and it's called the Seed Bank, the Korean Seed Bank. Why would we need a seed bank? You know, like someone said, you go to the bank to take out a loan. Indeed, you go to the seed bank to take out a loan. When your crops fail, and you want to reinstitute that crop, there's the seed bank. So how do you know if the seeds are alive? Oh, hang on. You take the seeds from the seed bank over here, and you bring them to the vertical farm, and you grow them. And if they don't grow, then you go outside and collect more. So the vertical farm in Korea, at least that one, is the test kitchen for the entire country's seeds. So maybe every country should have at least a seed bank and a vertical farm to serve that purpose, even if you're not producing people food. But there's one, of course. So now there's an association. You're worried about communities, you're worried about how to unite these things. I met someone at a meeting in Holland. His name was Max Losel. He was working in Den Bosch at a company called Plant Lab, and he was a student then, and he approached me and says, I would love to get involved in this, what do I do? I said, why don't you start a blog? And I said, nah, don't start a blog, that's what I do. And we'll be competing, we don't want to do that. I said, why don't you start an association? Why don't you do that? Why don't you start a vertical farm association? That was 6 years ago. You should see what happened since then. The guy's been amazing. In fact, he's got a partner who's a former student of mine. So we now have high-tech greenhouses and vertical farms spread throughout the globe. Of course, we're missing a lot of areas here, but remember, this is a fairly new idea, so give it some time. So these are the enabling technologies. You need hydroponics, which saves a lot of water, by the way, because outdoor farming uses 70% of the liquid water of the planet. It's fresh water. Hydroponics uses 70% less water. Aeroponics is a more highly technological experience, and it uses 70% less water than hydroponics. So if you're looking just to save fresh water, this is what you should be doing. And then, of course, efficient LED grow lights. Without those, you won't have it. So here's some examples of each of those technologies, just to make it clear as to what's going on. It's not, I'm going to say it's not rocket science, but rocket scientists want to use this technology to bring food supplies to, let's say, Mars, or to planet Alpha in another solar system. In order to do that, they've got to learn how to do it on Earth first. So here's are these plants growing in these little buckets, and there's a nutrient film technology, delivers the nutrients in water to the root systems, and the plants absorb it, and they're very happy to grow without soil. No soil. You're going to say, well, these must taste terrible. There's no soil. What about the terroir? Tell that to somebody who hasn't eaten in 3 days. Even if you can explain terroir to them, they're likely to slap your face rather than smile and say, oh yeah, what about the terroir? So people who don't have enough to eat, this would be a good technology to bring to them, I think. So here's another one. There's a floating system that uses little shallow pans, and you have styrofoam platforms, and you drill holes in the top, and you put your plants in these little holes in little cups, and the root systems go down into the water. And that works very well too. Pretty inefficient though, because the spacing of the plants, it's a little bit more dense than outdoor farming, but it's not as dense as the next technology, which is aeroponics. Aeroponics, they grow them on pieces of cloth that look almost like filters for air conditioners. And instead of planting one at a time, they will take handfuls of seeds and just sow the entire surface of this cloth. And then from underneath, they will spray the nutrient solutions. And these are all germinated seeds. and the seeds should send their root systems right down through the cloth, which is like soil to the plant. It's food and dedicates in the soil. And at the bottom of this, of course, is the reward. There's the water, and there's the nutrients. That's aeroponics. Then we have a combination of the use of fish in the bottom here, and the waste products from the fish to feed the plants above, and then the plants clean the water and send it back into the fish tank. Clever. That's an indoor ecosystem. And you can use fish that you don't eat, or you can use fish that you do. It doesn't really matter. Maybe to a fish eater it would matter. But to a vegan, where's that person? Vegan? I don't know how you insect thing. You just eat the plants, you don't eat the fish. Let me show you some examples, real examples of vertical farms. Here's one in Chicago. This was an old meat packing plant. There used to be a slaughterhouse next to it. That's all gone now from Chicago. And this building stayed because it was pristine. And someone moved into it and established an ecosystem of aquaponics and hydroponics. And also they brew beer, some of their growth products. So there's some fermentation involved in this too. All of the quote-unquote waste plant material is composted, and the methane is collected, and it drives an energy system which now takes this company off the grid. It's now totally sustainable. Totally sustainable. Or, in the real use of the word, it's sustainable. Someone wanted to know about grow lights. So here is what the LED grow lights look like. And they're blue and red. Why? Because this kind of light that you see here, if you're a plant, 90% of that light is wasted. The chlorophyll A and B can't absorb those wavelengths. Only these wavelengths, here and here. That's what plants do. So the rest of it is reflected. And by the way, that's why plants are green. Why? Because they reflect green light. They don't absorb it, they reflect it. That means that you can see the plant, right? Okay, simple stuff. Business concept. LED lights were not as efficient as they should be to make it economically possible to open a vertical farm by going to a bank with a business plan and saying, this is my energy budget, it's only 22% of my total operation costs. And then this Dutch physicist broke through the 28% efficiency barrier for an LED light. And in one day, the efficiency went from 28% to 68%. Now you do the math to find out how much of a savings that would be, and it's a huge amount of savings. So all the LED lights that you will see in all the grow systems will be LED lights produced by Philips. So if you work for Philips, sure, that's not a Monsanto company, but it's got some overtones. Here's what they all do. They're building a vertical farm on their research campus to demonstrate to their workers what the grow lights are for. And if you're really serious about it, you'll have lunch at the commissary, which is supplied, of course, by the vertical farm on the campus. Okay. Here's where vertical farms now exist. There are 145 plant factory/vertical farms in Japan as we speak, 45 in Taiwan, an enormous number in China, but they'll never tell us. There's one here, which was at the World's Fair in Milan, which was the United States Pavilion, and called itself a vertical farm. There are 4 in Singapore. There are many in the American Midwest. There's one in Texas. It's 18 stories tall that manufactures biopharma. And here are some names of commercial vertical farms that now not only are making money, which is not the main point of this, but to them it is, but I can tell you that land is being bought by countries for food supplies that have nothing to do with the country where the food is produced. That's crazy. And so this article that recently appeared in CNN Money said vertical farms would solve that problem by, okay, you don't have to go to that country any longer to make use of that. Right next door to where I live, this vertical farm is being constructed. It's an aero-class facility. Here's a guy who's already been to China twice. He's been hired by the government to make 20 of what he's already got in Portage, Indiana. So it's not only a growing industry, it's a growing industry. And today we have in the audience two gentlemen who please will stand up right now and introduce yourselves. We've got four of them actually. Two are in production and two more that want to be in production. And here's what they want to do. And they are in the process of doing it as we speak.
Yes. We have to go right now, actually.
Aren't these are beautiful. Wouldn't you like one in your backyard for your own consumption of fresh vegetables year-round? This is the ultimate gift of vertical farming. So what's the future look like? In 3 minutes. It looks horrible. Forget about it. I won't go there. So the carbon dioxide concentration continues to rise, and there are 7.3 billion people, and in another 20 or 30 years, there'll be another 3 billion. And since half of us now live in cities, that means that half of 7.3 billion people live in cities. So the agricultural footprint of cities is half of the size of South America. That's an enormous footprint. So I question, what if all of the world's cities grew only 10% of what they needed? Just 10%. We could regenerate from farmland outdoors now 340,000 square miles of hardwood forest that used to be there before those farms were there. And we could restore half of the Brazilian rainforest. Half. And that would take only 20 years from start to finish. Back to the Future, someone said that yesterday, so I had this slide. I wasn't copying you, but I did have this slide in place. We could set the time of the parts per million in the atmosphere of CO2 from our current level of 397 parts per million back to 360 parts per million, which is equivalent to the year 1987. If we restore 340,000 square miles of forest. That's the intended consequence of vertical farming. That slows down climate change. That gives us a chance to think about how to adjust to it. I didn't put you number one for nothing. You are number one in terms of ecological behavior. But you're not perfect, just like these other cities are not perfect. But if you added them all together, they would be perfect. So what the hell's wrong with getting all the mayors of these cities together and saying, we know what you're doing. You're saving water, you're saving electricity, you're creating bicycle paths, you're making life more pleasant for its citizens in various ways, but you're not all doing it together, and you're not all doing the same things. But what if we did? What would we name that city? Futuropolis. Maybe something crazy like that. It's not a utopian idea. It's actually possible now because they're all doing it, but they're not all doing it together. So my last statement to you is vertical farming has the possibility of freeing up land so it can rewild itself, to restore the environment, to restore ecosystem functions and services for the 7.4 to 5 billion people that we now have on the planet. Thank you.
There should be 2 microphones out here, so bring all the questions. I'm sure Jason is happy to answer them.
I'll try my best.
Thanks for the very nice talk. I was expecting it and you delivered, so thank you. I'm a bit concerned about production. Maybe you can give some examples of production. How would that work? Like, I don't know, a 3-story building of X?
Sure. So the book that I told you about that recently came out from Chiba University on how to vertical farm. The book that I wrote is why should you vertically farm? And actually, I didn't even show you that picture. It shows you how non-commercial I really am. Now, I'm really not pandering, but I do have a book. It's been out for a while, so if you want to see, if you want to read a book that says why we should be vertically farming, that's this book. But the next book that came out says how to vertically farm. So it has metrics, it has prices, it has yields per square foot for various crops, it has the lighting schemes, it has the nutrient schemes. You should get that book. The title, I'll give it to you after. I don't remember it offhand, but it's from Columbia University. It's brand new. It's on Amazon, and it's called something like "Practical Aspects of Plant Factories / Vertical Farms." And it's got like 80 examples in Japan.
We have a question from the back row here. Yeah, okay, yeah.
Right, thank you so much. I missed the first 10 minutes, so you already answered this question, and tell me to shut up. As far as I see it, it's maybe not a big problem to get salads and plants. The problem right now is to get enough protein to the people. If we would stop eating meat, for example, we would free a lot of land, and people can focus on eating plants instead. But as I see it, it's not as much a problem to get salads and so forth. That right now is what I've seen the main focus on vertical farming. So
That's correct.
Could we give some?
Sure. So if you're going to start a business and you're going to make it a vertical farm, you should price out your crops to match the consumer demands. So that's the beauty of indoor farming, is that you can go ahead of the farm itself and go to restaurants and schools and hospitals and wherever else you think you can sell, including grocery stores, and say, we can produce a list of green vegetables, and here's the list. And then, we don't get this all year long. We can take some, and you can get your list ahead of time. You can actually sell ahead of time, right? But you're absolutely right. The main food groups that you would like to have, root vegetables, grain crops, fruits, legumes, for instance. Those are all possible. And some of those vertical farms are actually producing some of those crops. But this is early times. We're talking about only 5 years worth of industrialization so far. And the consumer demand will eventually demand that each one of these places has a one-stop shop for all the things it will need to go home with a basket full of vegetables and fruits and herbs to have a complete meal at home. As far as the protein is concerned, if you're not averse to eating fish or crustaceans like shrimp or mollusks, those are all very possible to include into the mix of these buildings. If you're not averse to eating chickens, that's also there. Four-legged animals, I'm even against that. So forget pigs, forget sheep and cows, they belong outdoors, if at all. Okay, so I'm not saying that I don't eat meat, but I've certainly eaten a lot less of meat than I used to eat because I got married to somebody who doesn't eat a lot of meat. So it's the best way to learn how to calm your diet down, right? So I think it's a commercial question that you've asked, and the answer to it is allow the industry to mature to the point of consumers, this is great, can you do this? And the answer is, of course we can. So, and then we'll start to do that, sure.
Perfect. I think we have a question here from the back, and then one in the front row, and then I think we have one here. So I think that's what we can manage.
Thank you.
Hello? Okay, thank you for an excellent presentation. I'm from a political party called the Alternative, and what could we do from a political perspective to support this kind of agriculture?
It depends on what the problems are to begin with. In many cases, because agriculture was once a feature of most cities at the turn of the century, they had to pass laws to get rid of it, to make room for industrialization. And I've been part of testimony to state governments, for instance, and to city governments, to try to get them to understand what actually is meant by urban agriculture nowadays. It's not the same as it was, let's say, in 1900. So public health education is probably the best way to start. And I think you're not going to have a problem because you've got human habitat building vertical farms right now that you can say, well, here's what we mean by that. And you can take them right over to those facilities and show them. So if they're in doubt as to the impact that they might have on the urban scene, for instance, pollution or attracting vermin, things of this sort, I think the people who are actually running it are much better spokespersons than myself for explaining how that works. So I would suggest partnering with the people that are now doing it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think that's a very interesting idea, and I see there a lot of potential. I don't want to spoil the idea, but I was wondering when you first talked about the problems of agriculture today, how this is actually a solution for the problems, or whether it's just tackling more kind of the symptoms. Because I mean, you mentioned it yourself when you showed us the map of the world, that it's more, it seems to be more way to go for the global north than the global south, and that it seems like the problems that we have, that you mentioned at the beginning, stay in the global south, but the solution actually does just work for the global north. So, and I love the idea, and I think I think it needs these ideas.
Well, I hope I didn't say north versus south, because I think when it comes to climate change issues, you're worried about sea level rising. And sea levels, when they rise, they're going to force people inland, both in the north and in the south. So if your cities are on the coast, there will be island cities eventually. That forces more resources to the city. The urbanization movement that's present today is being driven by the failure of farms. The urbanization of the future will be forced by the rise in sea level itself. What kind of farming will survive after that? How many people it can feed? I can't honestly say. But I will say that the more indoor farming you do, where the people live, and supply them with some of their calories, not all of them, will alleviate or at least ameliorate some of these problems and slow them down. Okay? I'm not saying they're perfect solutions. I don't think there is a perfect solution. You could say, well, let's have fewer people. That's, it's like saying everybody's going to eat vegetables and not eat meat. I can't determine that for anybody else but myself. Right? Neither can you. I mean, you can legislate against it. You can say, no more drinking, no more smoking. You know those things are bad for you. We tried that in our country. All we did was import liquor from Europe. Or just go to Europe because that's where you can still drink. So the problems are complicated and complex, and farming is not a simple issue. But if you talk to a farmer in Southeast Asia, for them it's pretty simple. They used to get 3 crops of rice a year. In Vietnam, now they get 1 crop of rice. They still get the other 2 crops, but insect pests and rice blasts kill it. So what do they do? I don't know what they're going to do. I have no clue. But I think that if you don't offer solutions and alternatives to the present situation, that when you really have to apply them, the solutions are not there, it's too late.
I think we have time for just one more question. It was here. Yes.
Thanks. That was very interesting. So you're presenting a technology that can address some of the limitations of traditional agriculture, given the world where the world is headed. There's also that. I think this reminds me a lot about the debate that was been about permaculture some decades ago, actually, where permaculture seems to be modeled much more on the way that natural ecosystems support each other and are more resilient. Whereas this is very much a high technology and maybe also a high upkeep, a system that needs to be maintained a lot because it involves a lot of technology. Do you know anything in terms of how we compare this to permaculture and addressing the issues that mankind is facing with climate change and agriculture?
Yeah, it's my understanding that permaculture is more applied in tropical and subtropical regions than it is in temperate zones. But even if it works perfectly in temperate zones, remember, this is November, followed by December, as I recall, and then January. So for those months of the year, you're really limited as to what you can grow outdoors. You can grow some things, but not most of the things that you would like to have. So now you're dependent upon inputs from various other places. And that's where these foodborne outbreaks are. because you don't know where that food is coming from in most cases. And the guidelines that you have for food safety here are not being applied in those places. That might be in Ecuador, might be in Honduras, it might be in some other tropical country. So you're at the mercy of the farmers' practice in those places, okay? Whether they practice permaculture or just ordinary agriculture with fertilizers. It's not going to matter in terms of foodborne outbreaks, all right? So foodborne outbreaks are a big issue, at least in my country. I don't know what they're like here, but they're a big issue. The amount of maintenance for indoor farming, if you read this new book by the Japanese horticulturists, it's all automated. Every bit of it is computerized and systematized and backup systems, and they don't want it to fail. For sure they don't want it to fail. So they have over-organized it, so to the point of almost being too robust a system. They're looking at it like a rocket. You have to have these backup systems, right? So that's how they're planning out their schematic for the government-supported indoor agricultural industry of Japan. It's not necessarily the case for a lot of other places. A lot of it is hands-on, a lot of it is employment opportunities, a lot of it is growth opportunities. So we have a lot of conversation because I know we're running out of time. But it's a short question and a long answer.
Perfect. I'm sure you will be around here, Dickson. So if you have any more questions, please feel free to just ask away.